go ahead and dive in and start explaining that concept, Donovan.
That's a big part of how Wall Street's been running us into a ditch for the last 30 years.
The debt ceiling is not some sort of macroeconomic concept.
The U.S. isn't really a great place, and it's not really the land of the free.
Get 1,000 people together and let's go lay siege to City Hall.
Hello to all of the real progressives out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We have a fantastic show for you as always. I apologize. I had some technical issues on Sunday and could not do the show at the regular time. In fact, it's a little more frustrating than that. I spent an hour and a half recording a show that turned out did not have wonderful audio, and I couldn't even get it uploaded, and it was a whole mess. I am not the most technologically advanced person in the world, so I do apologize to you guys for that, but appreciate you joining tonight for a late night Tuesday stream, and I will try to make it worth the wait. I want to start, as always, with the plugs. For RP, go to realprogressives.org to learn more about us or find all of our fantastic content from articles to podcasts. You can go to realprogressives.org/donate if you would like to help us out. We are a nonprofit, and every little bit very much helps. I also wanted to plug an event that we have coming up here on the 19th. We're going to be doing an RP Live with Michael Hudson. So go to our website, realprogressives.org, to register for that. Make sure not to miss that. It'll be fantastic. Michael will give a presentation and then do a Q&A session. So if you'd like to ask Michael some questions, go ahead and register at realprogressives.org. for the RP Live coming up on the 19th. It'll be at noon Pacific, 3 o'clock Eastern. Make sure not to miss that. And it'll be hosted by yours truly. But will be an excellent opportunity to ask questions if you are interested. All right, so obviously the big news as of late has been, it certainly has dominated the news cycle, has been the death of Queen Elizabeth II. I have been blown away by just how obsequious the coverage of the Queen and the royal family has been. It's just been nothing but doting coverage, nothing but extreme adoration, no acknowledgement of what this family and what this royal family has done throughout history. And the response to people who dare to point out that they've been colonizers and imperialists are largely told that they're being disrespectful, and people have tried to cancel others for criticizing the Queen and the royal family. It has really been, coming from someone who is very cynical about the media, I have been absolutely floored by just how doting the coverage of Queen Elizabeth and the royal family has been. Obviously, you guys, and this is actually kind of made me reflect a little bit on something that I was perhaps not accepting, but just the existence of monarchies and royal families is so patently absurd on the surface, and I think a lot of us have just kind of accepted that that's the reality. I mean, really give it a thought, you guys. Give it a thought. Why the fuck does the monarchy still exist? If anyone can give me an answer to that, I mean, honestly, it is patently absurd, totally arbitrary, and also very, very harmful. I think that royal families, I think it serves to, first of all, create and maintain patriotism, which I think is largely a very negative thing. I also think it serves to make people sort of deify the elites, which I also think is an incredibly negative impact and something that is used to kind of control the masses. And I think that attitude also, applies to other forms of elites. I think it kind of it has reverberating effects. And I think that's incredibly harmful. I also think it actually plays into some of the very most sickly impulses that human beings have, in the sense that I think people tend to think tend to think of certain genetics as superior, or I think it plays into some of the very nastiest tendencies that human beings have as well. So on the surface, even having a monarchy in today's day and age is patently absurd and ridiculous, but this has gone a long way to revealing that. And for those that didn't see, I wish I would have brought this poll up now that I'm talking about this, but there's a very stark generational divide in the UK in terms of how the royal family is viewed. Those over 65 overwhelmingly think that the monarchy is good for the country. Those under 30 overwhelmingly think it is not. So I don't think that the monarchy will be around for very long, quite frankly. I think that younger generations have had it with this arbitrary nonsense. And I think that they're also probably kind of sick of being embarrassed on the national or on the international stage. Right, we're all like laughing at these traditions that the UK is engaging in right now. It's ridiculous. It's just totally meaningless and unnecessary and arbitrary, and it serves no purpose whatsoever. So obviously, Charles now becomes king, who himself is a rather unpalatable person and has quite a list of transgressions in his past. You know, to those who were kind of saying, like, how can someone like Charles rise to the throne? How can someone like that become the head of the church and the state? Well, go look up Henry VIII. Or I just, you know, I think I said the wrong name. Who did I just say? You guys, I'm sorry. I'm losing my mind. I've been at work all day. Anyway. You get the point. The history of the royal family is full of these kinds of transgressions. There's no reason that the royal family should be treated as a legitimate institution at all. And I have a few things that I want to show you guys here. So first of all, this is a tweet from Peter Darker, and it points out that roughly every 6 days in the world, a country celebrates its independence from Britain. They say this is why you don't mourn imperialists and colonialists. It's the most widely celebrated holiday in the world. Look at this map, you guys. I just want to bring this up full screen so that you can see. Look at that map. I mean, it's just everywhere. This is the impact that the British royal family has had on the world. They have wreaked havoc all over the world. They have been a negative for human relations and for societies all over the world. And we're all just expected to, you know, bow down and you know, celebrate the life of the Queen, who very much participated in this colonialism and this imperialism. So totally agree with Peter. You do not mourn imperialists and colonial and colonizers. And just very quickly on that note, you guys, I've never quite understood why it is that people seem to like. They think that you have to take this period after somebody dies where you're like not honest about them out of respect. I'm sorry, you don't earn my respect by dying. You earn my respect by how you live your life. And dying is not a respect earning thing. I do not respect Queen Elizabeth, and I would argue with anybody who does. I think you're wrong. I think she was a horrendous human being who did nothing but harm to the world. And to those who want to say, like, well, you know, Britain became a commonwealth under her reign. Do you think that was by choice? The reason all of these countries celebrate their independence from Britain is because they had to fight for it, and Britain fought against them in gaining that independence. They did not willfully give up power. The Queen is not some sort of, like, you know, virtuous character here. So you do not have to respect somebody just because they died. The Queen was a colonizer and an imperialist, and we all should call that out in this moment. And I also want to point out, you guys, the reason it's in the news at all, the reason that a death makes the news is because of who they are in the public. So what they do in the public is automatically necessarily relevant. It's not like a deflection to her transgressions. She is only making the news because of the role that she played in the world. So we should talk about the role that she played in the world. Okay? I also wanted to show you guys a quote here. This is by James Connolly. And this really kind of sums up a lot of the way I feel about this. He says, "We at least are not loyal men. We confess to having more respect and honor for the raggedest child of the poorest laborer in Ireland today than for any, even the most virtuous, descendant of the long array of murderers, adulterers, and madmen who have sat upon the throne of England." Absolutely spot on. That should be our response to the death of Queen Elizabeth. Okay? Let's see here. I also wanted to point out There was recently, this is a tale perhaps more often told in the United States, but a unarmed black man was killed by the Met Police in London, and the Sky News decided that they were going to totally misrepresent what this clip actually is. So I'm going to show you guys this tweet here. This is by Franklin Saint. I am lost for words. Sky News reporting the Justice for Chris Kaba march as a tribute walk for the Queen's death. You guys can see here, they're showing coverage of a march through the streets. This is to protest the police murder of Chris Kaba. Sky News says they must be, there to support the Queen. They must be paying their respects to the Queen. And I think part of what makes this so incredible to me is that I actually believe that was a genuine mistake. I think people that are sitting in producer rooms at places like Sky News, I think that they actually are so in a bubble that when they see a march like that, they just think, oh, it must be about the Queen, because nothing else is going on that people would care about, and everyone cares about the Queen. I think that's their mentality. And that just, that says a whole lot about the mainstream media and how it plays such an important role in propping up monarchies and the elite. So I also wanted to show you guys here, I have a piece in The Intercept about, I mentioned earlier that people are attempting to cancel others for daring to criticize the monarchy. This by Sam Biddle, again, it's in The Intercept. Twitter censored professor's post for abusive behavior toward the Queen. The policy was invoked to protect the world's longest reigning monarch who died that day from being silenced. A Twitter spokesperson said the social media giant deleted a Carnegie Mellon University professor's controversial tweet condemning Queen Elizabeth II on the grounds that it was abusive. The company defines abusive behavior as an attempt to harass, intimidate, or silence someone else's voice. In this case, the voice of the world's longest reigning monarch. Was a banner day for posting. As soon as news of the Queen's impending death hit Twitter, the platform was quickly dominated by a global outpouring of both grief and glee, a heated mixture of paeans to the Queen's 70-year tenure and angry denunciations of the British monarchy's legacy of colonial violence and exploitation. Among the latter was Carnegie Mellon University's Uju Anya, an associate professor of second language acquisition. She writes, quote, I heard the chief monarch of a thieving, raping, genocidal empire is finally dying. May her pain be excruciating. Quote, we took enforcement action on the account you referenced for violating the Twitter rules on abusive behavior, Twitter spokesperson Lauren Myers Kavanagh, using the British spelling of behavior, wrote to The Intercept in response to a query. The removal of the post illustrates how criticisms of powerful people, however distasteful, can be disappeared from social media sites for murky reasons. Quote, it does highlight the power imbalances that can often exist in the way these platforms treat powerful figures. Evelyn Dueck, an assistant professor, at Stanford Law School and scholar of content moderation policies, told The Intercept. Quote, often people in power get allowances because it's in the public interest, but people don't for criticizing them, even though that's often clearly in the public interest too. Anya's tweet immediately attracted widespread attention and criticism, not least because it was reproachfully, quote, tweeted by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. This is someone supposedly working to make the world better. The second richest American tweeted, I don't think so, wow. Twitter users were quick to point out that Anya had recently tweeted approvingly of Chris Smalls, a rising labor leader instrumental in efforts to unionize Amazon warehouses. So, gee, I wonder why Jeff might have a beef with this professor. I just want to say the petty side of me just absolutely loves how The Intercept says the second richest American in describing Jeff Bezos, because you know that it just eats him alive that he's not the richest, right? So I just love how they threw that nice little jab in there. My take on this side of things, obviously, this is what cancel culture actually looks like, you guys. The right loves to bitch and moan about cancel culture, but they are the very first to be like, tagging the company that someone works for, saying, did you know your employee was being mean to the Queen? They're the very first ones to try to get people fired or cause professional consequence to people who have opinions that they do not like. It's the very definition of cancel culture, and that's exactly what the conservatives have done here to this professor. My other take, though, and I wish I could give credit. I saw a few different people tweet this, so this is probably not any sort of groundbreaking concept. But I think people like Jeff are realizing for the very first time that their death will also be celebrated widely on Twitter, and I think they're throwing a temper tantrum over it. Obviously, characters like Jeff Bezos will have a large portion of Twitter celebrating their passing. That is just the reality, you guys. And like I said, I mean, you earn my respect in how you live your life. I am not going to pretend to like or respect somebody just because they have recently passed. I just don't think that's logical or reasonable, and to whatever extent I am trusted to bring you guys news and opinion and commentary, I would be violating that promise if I refused because someone had just passed. If I got up here and said, listen, guys, we can talk about the Queen in a month, but for now I'm going to be respectful, that would not be me doing my job here, right? And I think that same thing applies to general discourse as well. So absolutely stunned by just how obsequious the coverage has been. I knew it would be, but the extent of it is just absolutely incredible, you guys. Spain, wall-to-wall coverage of the Queen. The United States, wall-to-wall coverage of the Queen. A monarch in another country dies, and the whole world is like, oh, God, rest in peace. I mean, it really is kind of a condemnation of the human species in a broad sense that we still allow ourselves to be so easily tricked into caring about something as arbitrary as the royal family. And I will leave it at that, but I felt the need to address the media on this one. So anyhow, I do have one more fantastic clip to show you guys here really quick. This is Anthony Bourdain, and it reminds me why I miss Anthony Bourdain so much. This is very quick. I'm sure a number of you saw this, but this kind of sums up the way that I think the monarchy should be talked about and treated.
Cheers.
Gentlemen, cheers. To the Queen.
No, I hate the aristocracy.
It kind of cut off there at the end, but no, I hate the aristocracy, man. He just stops dead, doesn't even take a sip, just stares at the guy. Anthony Bourdain, absolutely fantastic. Just a totally brief side note. One of my favorite quotes ever was Bourdain. He says, if you have ever been to Cambodia, you will never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands. I'm pretty sure I got that word for word. One of the better quotes I've ever heard. Anthony Bourdain, that is someone I will say rest in peace to. That is someone who deserves the respect and adoration, unlike Queen Elizabeth II. So unfortunately, we have some concerning climate news to bring to you all, as usual. I always do that, you guys. I'm still learning StreamYard. How many years in here? Okay. This is a tweet thread by Ben C. at ClimateBen on Twitter if you guys want to give him a follow. Breaking. Scientists shocked by highest average temperature on record over Europe in 2022 for both August and summer. Summer defined as June through August, by substantial margins. And he shows a couple of charts here that I want to bring up for you. So this is looking at long-term temperature trends going back to 1880. You can see here one is Europe, one is Eastern China, one is North America, and one is extratropical Northern Hemisphere land. And they are all following exactly the same pattern going back 140 years. So this is not some people like to say, well, yeah, it was hot this summer, but, treat that as some sort of one-off. We see here that the concerns of climate scientists are the long-term trend, not the specific day or year in question, right? And, I mean, it's just, look at that trend. What can I say? Absolutely terrifying. Very concerning. And the other one here that he shares is about tipping elements. And you can see here the likelihood that we reach tipping points is increasing over time here. And that you see the year. This is actually looking back about 20,000 years. So long-term trends going in the wrong direction. And here he posts a screenshot of the start of an article. Exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius, global warming could trigger multiple climate tipping points. And for those who don't understand tipping points, I want to be clear, I'm not a climate scientist or any sort of scientist, but essentially Earth systems maintain certain standards, the temperature and things like this. But if you reach certain points, then the cycles will start to work against you. In other words, this is how the greenhouse effect works, right? You reach a tipping point, and then the Earth's systems, Earth's natural cycles and systems start to work against you in a vicious cycle. So we need to correct this before we start to hit a bunch of those tipping points, or we will not only be fighting the current issues that we're fighting, like the political issues of trying to get off our addiction of oil and fossil fuels, but we will add to our, like, you know, the entities that we have to combat. We will be adding Earth itself to that group, and suddenly the planet will also be fighting against us. So this is, I say this every time, the most existential issue that we face. It is incredible to me that this does not get more attention, even in leftist circles. And, you know, I encourage everybody to take the climate crisis seriously and to do whatever you can to try to combat it. I have a clip here from David Sirota. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys. I have a piece here to show you really quick. Also, David Sirota and The Lever. Very much encourage you to follow them if you are not following them already. This is, again, The Lever. It's by Julia Rock, David Sirota, and Andrew Perez. Quick shameless plug. If you missed my interview with Andrew, go back and find it on Real Progress in Action, talking about the largest donation in political history. They all do fantastic journalism over at The Lever. I really encourage you to check out their work. This piece is titled, Most Dems Mum on Blocking Manchin's Pipeline Deal. Many lawmakers are criticizing the Schumer Manchin climate bomb, but only a few have pledged to do what may be necessary to stop it. As vast swaths of the country are being battered by climate-intensified droughts and heat waves, Senator Bernie Sanders just threw a wrench into Democrats' reported plans to fast-track approval of oil and gas pipelines as part of an unrelated spending bill. On Thursday, he pledged to vote against the proposal, even if it is included in legislation required to avert a partial government shutdown. The open question now is whether enough other Democrats will use their power to block, rather than merely complain about, a pipeline deal that environmental groups say could detonate a climate bomb amid the intensifying ecological crisis. Soon after Sanders' announcement, one Democrat, Representative Ro Khanna, told The Lever that he would similarly vote no on a spending bill if it includes the pipeline measure. However, House progressives have not committed to providing a block of no votes in the lower chamber. The pipeline deal was originally negotiated by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Joe Manchin, who are respectively Congress's top recipients of fossil fuel and utilities industry campaign cash. One utility and pipeline company that could benefit from the deal has funneled more than $400,000 to Democrats' Senate and House campaign committees. Schumer said Wednesday he intends to attach the permitting deal to a so-called continuing resolution needed to keep the government running. Presuming that Republicans will vote against any Democratic spending bill, it would only take 5 Democratic no votes to block the legislation in the narrowly divided House. We will see if the progressives decide, or the progressive caucus, the actual, like, formal caucus, if they decide to provide a block on this deal. It would only take 5 of them. We shall see. I won't hold my breath, knowing the Democrats and how Chuck Schumer is handling this. Attaching it to a bill that most will view as a must-pass is, you know, I mean, there's obvious political incentive there, and shame on Chuck for that. It's incredible, you guys, how, like, when Bernie wants to attach an amendment to something, they all just bitch and moan and absolutely lose their minds over it. Oh, Bernie dividing the caucus, this and that. You know, trying to tank a bill. But when the corporatists decide that they're going to hold up a must-pass bill in order to slip in some goodies for the fossil fuel industry or the banks or the corporations or the Chamber of Commerce or fill in your fucking, you know, nefarious institution, it's always just viewed as business as usual. This will not catch much attention outside of outlets like The Lever, because mainstream and legacy outlets do not seem to care one iota about corruption in politics and about Democrats, you know, enforcing conservative policies. So, as I mentioned earlier, I have a clip here that I want to show you guys. This is David Sirota talking about Democrats grappling with dark money. So this is kind of tangentially related to the piece we just read, where corruption is clearly guiding the policy decisions of Schumer and Manchin and the Democratic caucus at large. That dark money has played a massive role in recent election cycles, and David does a wonderful job breaking down the potential for Democrats to at least rhetorically oppose dark money going forward. So this is David Sirota on Breaking Points talking about dark money in Democratic primaries.
Now for our weekly partnership segment with The Lever, and joining us now is the man himself, David Sirota, founder of that news outlet. Great to see you, David.
Good to see you.
So you are reporting this week on kind of a moment of truth for Democrats, Democratic establishment. Let's go and put this up on the screen. You're writing, the DNC faces a vote on dark money, and as anonymous cash buys Democratic primaries, party officials will be forced to declare which side of the democracy crisis they are on. Tell us more, David.
So the DNC is having its meeting in Washington this week, and a group of Democratic National Committee members led by the state chair of Nevada will put on to the DNC members a resolution basically condemning and trying to, I guess, symbolically ban dark money. I say symbolically because it's hard to know how a resolution like this would actually be enforced. But the basic thrust of the resolution is that the DNC would go on record saying that dark money should have no place in Democratic primaries. Right now, in this last election cycle, the one that we're currently in, 60% of House Democratic primary ads have been by groups that do not disclose all of their donors. Point being that dark money is really playing a particularly huge role in not only in general elections, not only in lobbying and in campaigns around issues, but it's playing a particular role inside of Democratic primaries where Democratic Party voters are selecting their nominees for general elections. And so the DNC will face a choice about whether to actually try to move the fight against dark money forward this week at their meeting.
Well, it seems noteworthy, too, that this fight is being led by a sort of like rogue state party, the Nevada Democratic Party. Could you talk to us about the significance of that?
Sure. A few years ago, the Nevada Democratic Party had a big fight between kind of the progressive activist, somewhat Bernie Sanders aligned wing of that party, and Harry Reid, former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid's machine in Nevada. And there was basically a takeover of the party by the now chair Judith Whitmer. And so that's who is essentially leading this resolution. So it's not necessarily a kind of out and out fight between the progressive wing and the establishment wing, because I think in Nevada there's been some coming together about this. There's been some healing reportedly. But I do think it's important to know that the origin story of this, that the more restive activist wing of the party is now bringing its concerns about dark money to the middle of the party, to the belly of the beast, if you will.
Yeah.
And we should remember that the party platform, the overall DNC party platform, says that the party is against dark money, that it wants disclosure bills to disclose dark money, the 501c4 groups. And there is Democratic legislation in the Senate supported by 50 Democratic senators that would do that. Now, that legislation hasn't moved forward. And this week's vote will be a chance to see if the DNC is willing to do something more than just have a kind of soft statement in its party platform.
Well, and it does seem like the efforts on the Democratic side to rein in money in politics have kind of fizzled out. Like, to the extent that they were ever really serious about it, which I think is a big question mark to start with, you just don't hear this as a focus anymore. You see certainly sort of like the mainstream corporate side of the Democratic Party embracing dark money to get their chosen outcomes in these primaries. So it seems to me like it is an important moment for that reason as well.
I absolutely agree. And I think you're right to sense the fact that the party is kind of rhetorically on record. Again, 50 Democratic co-sponsors of, for instance, the Disclose Act, and the Republicans, they're nowhere to be found on these issues. But I think there is a sense that it is rhetoric only, that it's not necessarily real. And as you suggested, part of the reason is because a part of the party inside of the party benefits from dark money. If you are a corporate Democrat, you are pretty happy that dark money groups are dropping into congressional races to buy races for the corporate wing of the party. So getting to an end of this, or taking steps to end dark money, it's not just a battle between Democrats and Republicans. It's a battle between kind of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and a kind of an unholy alliance between the corporate wing of the Democratic Party and the Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, because let's be clear. Look, everybody understands the difficulty of like getting a constitutional amendment through and the decisions that the Supreme Court has made and the way that sort of like hamstrings efforts to get money in politics overall under control. But the Democratic Party has a lot of say and a lot of sway over how they conduct themselves. The problem for them is that if they actually took a stand against dark money, it would kneecap their ability to take out the progressive challengers that they want to be able to sideline and they want to be able to defeat.
And let's underscore one other point, because I've seen some of the reaction to this vote. Oh, well, the Democrats shouldn't have to unilaterally disarm in general elections. What's interesting about this resolution is it's talking about Democratic primaries. So if you separate out we need to, we can't unilaterally disarm in general elections, put that aside for a second. The question really is, should Democratic Party primaries, the process by which Democratic Party voters select their nominees, should that process be dominated by dark money? Some of the details that we know, and there's not all that much of it because these donations are anonymous, but we know that Republican money, the big Republican donors, have been some of the donors funding some of the Democratic Party primary spending in these races to get more conservative corporate Democrats. So again, the question here is, how should the Democratic Party itself, inside of its own process, conduct itself, and should dark money be able to decide who the party's nominees are? That's what's at issue here.
Lastly, David, I'd love it if you could just remind the audience of an example or two where dark money really played an outsized role in some of these primaries.
Oh, sure. There's the United Democracy Project. That's what the dark money group was called. It was a group that some of it discloses some of its donors, doesn't disclose all of its donors. It's funded in part by the American Israel Public Affairs Council. It has gone into races. It went into the race in New York City recently, and part of that money is not disclosed. And it's spent the progressive candidates into the ground. And an heir to the Levi Strauss empire ended up winning that primary with a huge boost of dark money, and the sources of it weren't really disclosed to voters. So I mean, we could go race by race, but this is happening all over the country. Again, with anonymous dark money putting the thumb on the scale of the primary process, so that voters are getting election communications funded anonymously that are attacking progressive candidates.
I think this is a very important and very revealing story and moment for the Democratic Party. So we will see how they ultimately respond. I think we both know how the vote is going to ultimately go down. David, great to see you. Thank you for the reporting.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, the obvious, the answer that Democrats always give to this is, well, we have to take big money because otherwise, we will be disarmed against the Republicans. And David points out here, this discussion is simply rhetorically and symbolically saying we should not allow dark money to dominate our own primaries. And even that is sparking a controversy and war within the Democratic Party, which should tell you a whole lot about what the party actually stands for. So, I believe they cited in that interview, 60% of the money that has come into primaries this election cycle alone is from dark money groups. I'll again plug that interview I did with Andrew Perez. Seriously, you guys go watch that if you haven't read the piece on The Lever about Barry Side's donation to Leonard Leo and how Leonard Leo has essentially, orchestrated the conservative takeover of the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court. And Andrew was one of the writers of that piece talking about the largest donation in history. It was $1.6 billion that Barry Side gave to Leonard Leo. That's the kind of donation that we're talking about here. Funneled through dark money groups and funneled through trusts and other entities that do not have to be on the public record. It's incredibly nefarious. It's obviously hidden from you for a reason, and the fact that the Democratic Party can't even agree to pull this out of its own primary process, again, really should tell you a whole heck of a lot about what that party stands for and who it is in bed with. So I just thought that clip was kind of related to the climate stuff in the sense that it is obviously corruption and capitalism that continue to perpetrate the climate emergency. So wonderful work from David. If you're not following The Lever, go to levernews.com and check out some of their fantastic work. So I want to talk about a story here out of Los Angeles. I have an article to show you guys here. This is in The Appeal. It's by Nilly Blanc. LA ended a zero bail COVID rule, and now the jail population is growing. In June, a judge ended an emergency order to slow the spread of COVID-19 in LA's jails, enraging civil rights advocates. On June 14th, as a new subvariant of the COVID-19 virus began to spread rapidly around the country, the Los Angeles County Superior Court announced a plan to rescind a zero bail policy designed to ease overcrowding in jails during the pandemic. First, guys, if you're unaware, the pandemic is still not only happening, but raging on. We're seeing thousands of deaths a day right now. And, you know, the fact that we have decided to collectively as a society pretend that the pandemic is over is beyond outrageous to me. Simply outrageous. You should very much still be taking COVID seriously, if not for yourself, for those who are immunocompromised or elderly or otherwise more vulnerable than you might be. I would also point out that a large portion of the U.S. populace is currently dealing with long COVID, according to recent studies, and long COVID could be very bad news. We don't even really know the extent to which it can be bad news because it is still so fresh. So I would really encourage my audience to continue to take deadly viruses seriously. Anyhow, we'll carry on with this article. The so-called emergency bail schedule policy, which was first inspired by a set of emergency rules enacted by the California Judicial Council in the spring of 2020, set bail to zero for a number of nonviolent misdemeanors in order to release the county's lowest level offenders and lessen jail crowding overall. But now, despite the fact that the spread of COVID-19 continues, the Los Angeles County Superior Court believes it's time to begin charging people to exit jail once more. Quote, the EBS was not conceived as a part of California's efforts at zero cash bail reform, the court said in a press release. They are completely different. $0 bail initiatives seek, as a matter of public policy, to permanently eliminate cash bail as part of bail reform. The court's EBS did not eliminate cash bail and was intended to be a temporary response to the pandemic-related dangers inherent in pretrial incarceration. Okay, we're going to continue, but I just want to briefly note, what a pathetic response. What a pathetic response. First of all, it is just ridiculous to, again, pretend that the pandemic is over and that it is now safe to go back to overcrowded jails. There are also a whole plethora of other issues to do with overcrowded jails, obviously, but COVID's still very much one of them, and for this court to simply pretend that we are beyond that, I think, is ignoring the science and the facts and the reality. But secondly, to essentially say, yes, we know that it's the will of our state to zero out bail as part of its criminal justice reform, even though we know our constituents would like that, even though we know that this is in the process of potentially becoming reality in the coming years. This was a temporary measure, so we're just going to go back to that awful, harmful thing that we all know is unhealthy for society. We're just going to go back to that because it was never intended to be permanent. I mean, just seriously, what a pathetic answer from this court as to why it has decided to do this. Carrying on. The move has enraged civil rights activists who say the zero bail policy demonstrated that the county should cancel cash bail for good, even though many of those advocates believe that the EBS did not go nearly far enough to actually solve the problem of over-incarceration in Los Angeles or the mass spread of COVID-19 in jails. They readily admit it was a step in the right direction. Meredith Gallen, a Los Angeles County public defender and member of the Public Defenders Union, Local 148, told The Appeal that she wished the zero bail order had led to permanent, systemic change in the county jail system. Quote, this was an opportunity to set a precedent, she lamented. For people who are engaged in progressive reform and are concerned about cash bail, we viewed this as an opportunity to set a precedent that would last for longer and we could learn from. In theory, cash bail, which is returned to whoever pays the bail once litigation is complete, is not a punishment itself and is designed to guarantee that a person charged with a crime returns to court. In practice, however, even small bail amounts trap poor people in the jail system, while those with access to money often walk free no matter the severity of their crimes. In California, where the median bail amount is more than 5 times the national median, cash bail keeps thousands of indigent people in detention even though they have yet to be convicted of a crime. When the EBS was first enacted, LA County reduced its jail population by almost 30%, from 17,000 to around 12,000, its lowest number in decades. Since the policy was terminated on June 30th, when there were 13,232 people in the jail system, the number has increased. According to the county sheriff's website, the total jail population was 14,471 as of September 6th. According to the county's website, 144,592 people had tested positive for COVID-19 in the county jail system as of that same date. 23 people died from the disease. Nearly half of those held in LA's jails are pre-trial, meaning they are waiting behind bars because they cannot pay their bail. In a report published in 2017, Human Rights Watch calculated that every person in pre-trial detention costs taxpayers an average of $114 per day. I just want to note, since we're always talking MMT and how nefarious the use of taxpayer dollars and things like that are, this is talking about a local constituency. So the use of the term there is much less inaccurate and less disingenuous than it often is. It is costing the local public, if you will, the local public government, if you will, 114 per day per citizen. The same report described some of the severe consequences for people who have to wait behind bars for months or even years before their case is resolved. That list includes losing their housing, getting fired, having their children sent into foster care, and going into debt. While in confinement, people are also often unable to pay child support or take their medications regularly, and they are susceptible to violence by other incarcerated people and by guards. Those held in pretrial detention also miss out on the critical opportunity to properly prepare for trial. Studies have shown that people who are held in jail before their trials are more likely to be convicted than those who are not detained pre-trial. According to a Columbia Law School finding, there is, quote, significant evidence of a correlation between pretrial detention and both conviction and recidivism. All right, so wonderful, wonderful piece there in the appeal. And this is a horrific policy decision by this court, who falls back on the fact that it was a temporary policy to justify that horrific decision that goes against what Californians obviously want. And again, you guys, I just want to reiterate, if the intent of the policy to start with was to prevent overcrowding in jails during a deadly pandemic, then that policy should still be in place. We are not done with COVID. You cannot simply decide that something is over because you are tired of it. Believe me, guys, I wear a mask at work all day, every day. I don't want to do that. It's not comfortable. I leave work and my ears ache from the damn thing holding on to my head all day, right? It's not pleasant for anybody to have to deal with a fucking pandemic, but you cannot simply decide that something you don't like is over. Science does not give one shit what you think of it. It just doesn't. So we can either operate in reality or we cannot. And if we choose not to, that will cause incredible harm to the elderly population, to immunocompromised folks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not even getting into long COVID, which we are learning more and more about just how prominent and harmful long COVID is as well. So you can go ahead and pretend that COVID is over, but if you are doing so, you really are part of the problem. I encourage everybody to continue taking this pandemic seriously. I've used this analogy so many times on so many different things, you guys, but if you know a tsunami is coming, do you just say, well, I'm tired of the tsunamis. I'm going to sit here and build a sandcastle with my kid at the beach because I don't like that tsunami. I'm growing tired of that tsunami. Is that what you would do? If it were that explicit and obvious and in your face, is that the decision that you would make? Or would you respect reality and say, shit, I guess we got to leave the beach? Anyway, I encourage my audience to continue to take deadly viruses seriously. And I wish that the county of LA would do the same. And this is also, you guys, insofar as our criminal justice system is incredibly classist and racist, who is going to be most adversely affected by this horrific policy? Again, virtually everything in our society harms racial minorities and the poor and working class more than it harms anybody else. So outrageous decision by this court, outrageous decision by the county, and I hope that California will go forward with those initiatives to zero out cash bail entirely in the near future. We have some fantastic reporting here from Jen Dyes, who is with Courage News. She FOIA requested some information on the FBI's targeting of Aretha Franklin. So I'm going to read this thread that she put together, and I think this is quite revealing in terms of how the FBI views the black community and leftist leaders and revolutionaries, etc. So just fair warning, there are some quotes in here from the FBI that are very unsettling. This again, Jen Dies, at Jen Elizabeth J on Twitter. News: years ago, I FOIA'd FBI files on Aretha Franklin. Today, I received the files. While incomplete, they show repeated and disgusting suspicion of the famed black singer, her work, and activists around her. 1976. Document states that a West Coast communist newspaper carried a story that the National United Committee to Free Angela Davis raised $38,000 and that Aretha Franklin sang at the event. Further, they claimed Franklin was associated with other, quote, black extremists and groups. And she's posting screenshots as we go, you guys. If you want to go read through all the details, I encourage you to go take a look at this thread. 1967, declassified in 2022. MLK's Southern SCLC 10th anniversary discussed on document titled Communist Infiltration of Southern Christian Leadership Conference Internal Security, noting Sidney Poitier and Aretha Franklin, popular entertainer, will also appear at the banquet. 1968 discusses SCLC labeling U.S. treatment of Vietnamese as genocide. FBI source discusses Aretha Franklin's father and also said, quote, SCLC leadership has taken a hate America and pro-communist line which the mass of Negroes will not recognize but which they will blindly follow. Look at that framing, you guys. Oh, my word. Where do you even start with that? 1971, Aretha Franklin's every move is carefully documented by the FBI. In this document, just now declassified, direct contact information and details of her Atlantic Records contract are discussed, presumably, quote, just in case. 1972, the FBI placed a false phone call using suitable pretext to determine who the recipient was of a phone call from the Black Panther Party. It was determined that the call was made to Aretha Franklin. The FBI described her as a, quote, noted Negro singer and entertainer. 1969, in a document excluded from automatic downgrading and classification, an unrelated disruption at a 1968 Aretha Franklin concert was swept into discussion of, quote, possible racial violence, major urban areas, racial matters. 1968, document discusses funeral plans for MLK, calling it a racial situation. It states, source advises Atlanta Braves Incorporated had donated Atlanta Stadium to SCLC for huge memorial concert. Above entertainers were to perform, as were Sammy Davis Jr., Aretha Franklin. Of this group, some have supported militant black power concept. Performance at MLK Memorial by these prominent entertainers would provide emotional spark which could ignite racial disturbance in this area. 1966, the FBI frequently had sources and infiltrators feeding them very specific information from within the civil rights movement. Here's an example from these Aretha Franklin files. She, again, is posting screenshots of this FOIA information as she goes. 1973, there were frequent attempts to connect Aretha Franklin and other notable black figures to anything they deemed nefarious. This FBI doc follows up on claim that she was connected to the Black Liberation Army, any radical movement. The finding was that there was no evidence. I just really want to underscore that one, you guys. One of the most prominent strategies to try to delegitimize leftist and black revolutionaries and groups is to make some word or thing or concept, quote unquote, nefarious and bad, and then try to attach those groups to that thing. So we engage in decades and decades of Red Scare tactics, right? Constantly crying communism and framing communism as though it's this horrendous, awful thing. And then we try to attach these groups to it as a way to delegitimize them and stunt their ability to get the masses behind them and to form coalitions. That is a strategy that has been used for decades and decades by the FBI and their allies. 1985. It's important to note that many documents in these files are missing or remain heavily redacted, and she shows a few examples there. Quote, the CW, redacted, advised many OC figures own or control entertainers or groups. Some of the groups or entertainers and the people who control them that he is aware of are redacted, Michael Jackson, redacted, and Aretha Franklin by Stan Hoffman. 1979, Aretha Franklin had some incredibly scary things happen to her. 4 months after her father was shot in Detroit, she received a threat from a man who said he was going to kill her and her family. She was threatened many times over her career. 1974, another example comes in a letter. Quote, Dear Aretha, I'm in charge of you. I'm not to be crossed. You should be paying me some of my money. Evidently, your advisors do not know the dangers of neglecting what I'm saying. I would hate to drag your father into this. Interestingly, the FBI wrote, quote, the original letter and envelope are being sent to New York rather than submitted for fingerprint and lab examination. It's been handled by numerous persons since received. This handling would be the case with any mailed item, so I'm curious. Potential further info about why was redacted or what was redacted. I'm not sure which she meant there. On May 9th, 1974, an FBI document states that Cecil Franklin furnished a letter which was said to contain a threat against Aretha Franklin, SDNY, redacted, who declined prosecution in this matter, redacted, AUSA, redacted, stated additionally, redacted. You can see she's kind of making the point there that even when you successfully FOIA these kinds of documents, they often come heavily redacted and provide less information than you might want. But this fantastic reporting from Jen Dyes at Jen Elizabeth J on Twitter, if you want to go give her a follow, and at courage_news is her organization. This just speaks to me to how the FBI has conducted itself in response to leftist organizers and revolutionaries and to black groups and organizers over, its entire history. Hoover was a raging racist, classist, and his institution reflected those views. So we all know the stories, you guys. Like, we all know that they've been involved in assassinations of Black Panthers, and we all know they were overwhelmingly likely to have been involved in MLK and Malcolm X, and I mean, you just go down the list, right? This is how the FBI and the feds have treated revolutionaries throughout history, and I thought it was very interesting that they were targeting Aretha Franklin and trying to connect her to nefarious groups. And even the heavily redacted documents have shown and proven that. So great work from Jen Dyes. Really encourage you guys to give her a follow. All right, guys, I want to show you a clip here. This is Jeff Stein. He is with the Washington Post. He covers Capitol Hill, and he, I think, does a pretty good job of getting some inside information for us and sort of telling us where things are when bills and things like that are being negotiated. He went on Breaking Points to talk about how the Republicans are planning to try to push back on Biden's cancellation of some tiny amounts of student debt. Apparently, this is a pretty unanimous position among Republicans, and they are trying to go the legal route to essentially say that Biden did not have the authority to do what he has done. And some of the legal dynamics are kind of interesting here, so I wanted to show you guys this clip. This, again, Jeff Stein on Breaking Points.
Joining us now is the one and only Jeff Stein. Great to see you, Jeff.
Good to see you, man.
Thanks for having me back on, guys. Really appreciate it.
Got it working today. Excited about that. Let's go ahead and put your latest reporting here about the Republican plan to use the courts to block Biden's student loan debt relief. Let's go ahead and put that up on the screen. Headline here is Republicans are readying lawsuits to block Biden's student debt plan. GOP attorneys general, top lawmakers, and conservative groups are discussing legal options, alleging the White House's move to cancel student debt is illegal. What are they looking at here, Jeff?
So when the White House announced its student debt plan, there was this question of how are they going to defend this? It's a huge unilateral action, a huge expansion of executive authority. And there's a question of, how, can they do this without Congress? The White House cited a law that Congress passed after the 9/11 attacks in 2003 that gave the president, they say at least, broad discretion over the student loan portfolio, essentially. And Republicans are saying that the context in which that law was passed was clearly emergency measures after 9/11, not an attempt to allow the president to completely write higher education law. So that's what they'll be focused on. But as we can discuss, the critical issue for Republicans, according to the legal analysts I speak to, is not necessarily even that question about whether the 2003 law can be justifiably cited. I think a lot of legal analysts think that Republicans may have a winning argument there. The key question for Republicans is going to be, can they prove or find someone with standing, someone who can bring the case forward and say that they are legitimately adversely affected by this and get the case heard by the courts? That might actually be the bigger obstacle to getting this overturned for Republicans. And obviously, we should talk about the consequences for tens of millions of people who would be affected.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing I was reading, which is that, as Ted Cruz pointed out, you need to kind of have it just explain. You need a student loan debt servicer who's not for the government. Like, who exactly would the plaintiff be in the case?
So this is exactly the right question, because according to the Republicans I've talked to, they're sort of searching high and low for the right person that could be this person with standing, their dream plaintiff. And the reason they're doing that is because it's actually harder than you think to bring a case alleging that the president has violated the Constitution. As I said, you need this plaintiff to get the courts to hear the case. It's pretty clearly established, and Ted Cruz has admitted this, or acknowledged this, I should say, that someone who's a taxpayer or someone who didn't get their student loans forgiven, or someone who never took out student loans, the courts are pretty unlikely to look at that as a justification for bringing standing. And so you need someone who shows that they were adversely harmed, and not in this sort of general, maybe my taxes will go up in some vague, indirect way, or maybe, I should have qualified this, but I didn't. Or even, the other argument that Ted Cruz had sort of been flirting with was, maybe we can find someone who's a current student, didn't qualify for student debt forgiveness, but their tuition costs, one could argue, will go up as a result of the cancellation. Maybe that's a plaintiff. And Cruz has sort of said that he doesn't really think that option is going to work either. And so what Cruz is now suggesting, and he said that he spoke to a top conservative legal analyst who's likely to argue this in front of the Supreme Court, is that they'll look for a student loan servicer. The problem with that, as you were alluding to, is that the student loan servicers have lots of business in front of the federal government. So you need one of them to take the political risk or the financial risk themselves of saying, this fight, we're going to lose so much business from this that we're willing to potentially directly antagonize our main clients. And that is going to be, I think they'll find someone, but that's the challenge for the conservative legal movement right now.
Got it.
That's all very interesting. Well, to your point about how Republicans feel like they might have a decent case here, you spoke with an analyst who is in support of student debt cancellation, who said if they keep going with this argument, with the particular justification that they use to go ahead with student loan debt relief, and this interpretation of the statute, is likely they will lose 6-3. It's possible they could lose by more than 6-3. I foresee this good policy being rightly struck down by the courts on legal terms. Why did they use this 2003 statute rather than using the statutes that have used previously by presidents to justify all manner of student loan debt relief, albeit more targeted student loan debt relief? But why did they decide to use this particular justification? And are they sort of locked into that, or can they change their mind and come up with a different legal justification?
It's a great question. So the professor you're alluding to, Professor Jed Sugarman, whose name just stuck with me because it's quite colorful.
It's a cool name.
He was making the point that, sort of what you were explaining. In 1965, Congress passed a law that gave the president lots of authority over student loans. And he's saying, if this 2003 law can be challenged on the grounds that it's not really an emergency anymore, why didn't the White House just cite this 1965 law that gives the president broad authority and is not clearly based in post 9/11 statute? And the speculation among the legal analysts I've talked to is that someone in the DOJ found some reason, there's a bit of a mystery that I haven't quite gotten to the bottom of, that someone in the DOJ or the DOE in the Department of Education has discovered that the courts are not likely to look favorably on the citation of that 1965 law because it really isn't explicable. And what Sugarman and other legal analysts are saying is the White House still has time, that the Department of Education hasn't put out its final guidance yet. This has not really begun moving. And the White House could still come out and say, this 2003 law is important, but we should also keep in mind that even if it was invalidated on those grounds, there's this 1965 law that we can cite, and we should go with that. We haven't heard that yet. I spoke to Lawrence Tribe, who's a Harvard law professor that the White House talks to a lot. He also said, we should also just throw out this 1965 argument, because why not? But the fact that they haven't, they're a really smart and a huge team of people working at the DOJ, and it's kind of inexplicable to me that they would just miss this. I could find it, and I don't know anything about the law, so I'm sure there's some justification there.
So then my last question then is the White House. Do they see this as a threat? Were they aware of it? Are they preparing for it? How much is this on their radar for something they consider a major achievement on their part?
Well, it's a tough thing to answer, because some of the legal analysts I was talking to were saying that if you look at Biden's speech, what he gave when he was introducing the student debt forgiveness plan, there's basically, I think, almost no mention of the idea that this is an emergency measure. I mean, he talked about the crisis in student loans and higher education, how broken the financing is, but he never really said, which the legal memo the White House released said, that this is partially motivated by the COVID crisis, and that this is an extraordinary economic circumstance, which of course the White House doesn't want to go out there and say, we need to do this because the economy is a nightmare and people need help. He wants to say, we're taking corrective action to this, long-running structural issue in the economy. But that might be sort of at odds with the legal argument that his attorneys are going to have to make in front of the Supreme Court. And the conservatives I'm talking to are saying, we're going to use Biden's words against him and say, the president never talked about this as a COVID emergency economic measure. He talked about it as sort of long-term social policy goals.
Do Republicans see a political risk here? Because you're talking about taking away a very significant and potentially transformative benefit from literally tens of millions of people. I mean, I'm sure you spoke with people who will be impacted by this in a positive way. I've certainly read the accounts that you and other reporters have been sharing, and people are saying this is literally going to change my life. This is going to enable me to be able to get on the road towards home ownership or be able to start a business. This completely changes how I was looking at the near term and the midterm and the future for myself. That's a very difficult position to be in politically, to then say, nope, we don't like it. We're going to fight tooth and nail to take it away from you. So are there any voices on the Republican side that are saying, guys, maybe we should just let this one go?
No, I have not heard a single Republican say we should just
and so
let this one go.
What's their political calculus?
I think that's a genuine ideological conviction here. I know obviously politics is everything in this town, but I think there's a real revulsion to the premise of this policy. I don't know if you guys share this. I'd be curious for your take, but the intensity of emotions that the student loan fight provokes is on par with anything I've ever covered, from people who feel like this is not nearly enough to people who say that this is a slap in the face of hardworking Americans. This is just such a fraught issue, and I think Republicans are really committed to the idea that that this is a bailout for people who don't deserve it, and the polling, from what I can tell, it has been pretty good for the Democrats. Biden has had a really serious and meaningful bump with young voters since this was announced. Maybe there's other things that are part of that, but that's a big change that the White House is really excited about. And the Republicans willing to fight this. I think they just really don't like student debt cancellation. I think you're right. And they're hearing from people who are also really, really pissed off about it. And I'm sure the comments on this YouTube video will be incredibly split, because that's how this has gone. So
don't make
I'm
the
just
mistake of
curious
reading them.
That.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say politically, you're always going to...
You're very kind to me, honestly.
Good.
Well, I mean, you see it in so I watched the way Sean Hannity was talking about this issue, for example, and they really see it as a moral issue, And so it does cut at this deep level. Politically, I always think the people who are actually gaining the benefit and now have something really directly to lose, obviously they have a much more vested stake than people who have an ideology and they sort of theoretically think maybe sometime in the future my taxes could be increased. That's why you see something like Social Security as being so difficult, and why Republicans have tripped on that landmine a million times and still seem to want to continue down that path. even though they fail over and over again. So, yeah, I think politically at this point, it's hard to deny the evidence that for young voters, this was a huge boon for Biden. Their approval rating of him has like completely flipped. He was dramatically underwater. Now he has a positive, favorable rating with youngest cohorts of voters, as I've seen in the latest polls. So for Democrats, I think this has definitely been net positive thus far. And then Republicans have this, they have their own constituencies that they're responding to that are very powerful in Republican primaries, for example, and really have their ears, or maybe in the donor set, who are very, very upset and may push them in this direction. Even though, again, I think it's very politically perilous for Republicans to be in the business of trying to strip what is a significant and transformative benefit for tens of millions of Americans.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, Jeff. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to overstate this, but because I think, this is only one policy. It's kind of limited in some ways, but I think we're seeing the at least attempt of, during the Clinton, era and when Hillary ran for president, there was sort of a lack of attention, I think a lot of Democrats felt, to delivering tangible material benefits for people and seeing if that would lead to more political success. And this could be a sort of a test case for that premise.
Yeah.
Indeed. A very interesting one to watch. Jeff, thank you so much for breaking it down. Great to see you, my friend.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, guys. Great.
Okay, so I think the extent to which Democrats are going to fight this is very up for debate. I don't think that the Democrats, even when they actually are ideologically in favor of doing something, and I do think at least a portion of the party is very much in favor of canceling at least a means-tested miniature version of canceling student debt. I think what Democrats will often do is think that they're going to get credit for trying, even if they know they're going to fail. We'll see what comes of this. There seems to be some question about whether Republicans can find a plaintiff that will actually qualify to take this up to courts. I certainly hope they don't, you guys. As critical as I was of how inadequate that policy is, it would pull like 20 million people or something out of their student debts, and it would put a substantial dent in many more millions of people's student debts. That is good, as inadequate as it is. I hope the Republicans fail here. But I think the extent to which the Democrats are serious about canceling student debt, I mean, all you have to do to sort of question that is to look at, it took them a year and a half to do something that just took a signature on a piece of paper. So I don't think it's at all unreasonable to question how committed Democrats are to actually fighting this fight. Obviously, I think Republicans were going to fight this from the jump for a whole number of reasons. I think first and foremost, because I'm a little bit of a political cynic, I think first and foremost, the Republicans did not want to see Biden and Democrats get a boost in polling from this. And again, as inadequate as it is, and as much as it reveals that they spent a year and a half lying, saying they couldn't do this, and as much as there are political problems with such a pathetic half measure, obviously, like, taking debt away from tens of millions of people is going to probably help you at the polls. And I think Republicans don't want to see that. So they're going to fight this, even though that would also reflect pretty poorly on them to those voters. I think they're going to fight this out of spite for what Democrats were trying to do. I think it's very reasonable to question the extent to which Biden is actually committed to canceling student debt. I think his own actions create those questions. And obviously, the Democrats, even, as I said, even when they are ideologically in favor of something, tend to just play doormat anyway. So we'll see how much the DOJ decides they're going to fight this. We'll see if Republicans are able to find a plaintiff that qualifies, and then we will see if they are able to succeed taking this up the courts and arguing that 2003 law was specifically about 9/11. But it's really interesting too how Republicans and most Democrats favor the insane security state that came from laws like that 2003 law, but don't seem to want that executive power to help anybody. And I think it's worth noting that as soon as you try to use this bill for anything other than like illegal surveillance or waging war against black and brown people around the world, or committing crimes against those people, or imprisoning them without trial in Guantanamo or Abu Ghraib, or any, like, as soon as you try to use it for anything that is not like the worst imaginable thing, then there's like this outcry. Oh, that's not what the bill was for. It's very revealing, right? So anyway, shame on Republicans here. Shame on Democrats for taking so long and doing something so inadequate. I hope that the Republicans fail in their attempt to undo this, but I also question the commitment of Democrats and Biden to actually fighting to maintain it. So we shall see what comes of that, but I thought that was a great breakdown there from Jeff on simply the mechanics of what's going on and how that fight looks like it's going to go down. So another huge story, you guys, and this, unfortunately is indicative of a lot of places around the world, or around the country. I'm sure the world too, but in particular the United States. We've talked about Flint before. We've talked about, was it Chicago, Indiana? And there are a number of there are towns in West Virginia. There are, all over the place. There are cities that are going through water crises. In fact, thousands of cities have lead and bacteria and other contaminants in their water, just like Flint, just like now Jackson, Mississippi. This is a tweet from Molly Minta. I just wanted to give you guys an idea of how bad it is. Look at that water, you guys. Look at that water. That's not water. That's mud. So this was just a few days ago that she posted this. So the water crisis continues in Jackson, Mississippi, which I'm sure I don't have to tell my viewers, as with many of the cities that are left out to dry in terms of their water supply, is disproportionately black. It is poor and black and brown communities that are left out to dry in these scenarios. And I also wanted to show you guys here a chart showing how federal funding for water infrastructure has declined. They say 77% per capita since 1977. The water infrastructure crisis is a national one. This is by vocal advocacy class, #defundBPD. So I want to show you guys this chart. It goes back to 56. It appears that 58 is when federal spending on water infrastructure began, and you can see how that chart goes. It seems to peak around 1976, and then it has been at a pretty steady decline ever since then, and it goes through 2014. So this, you guys, I want to take an opportunity here to talk about federal funding a little bit. This is one of the reasons that it is so important for basic needs to be financed at the federal level. Local constituencies are financially constrained in a way that the federal government is not. Local constituencies do have to rely on tax dollars and loans and things like that to pay their bills. The federal government is the currency issuer and therefore does not have to rely on those things to fund its programs. That is why basic needs like healthcare, like housing, like water should very much fall under the financing of the federal government. And this is one thing we talk a lot at RP about. This is why MMT, or modern monetary theory, is so critically important. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say that, please, you guys go to realprogressives.org to learn more about MMT. We have all sorts of educational material there. It is very important to understand how the federal government finances itself when we talk about these policy issues. I would also encourage you to read The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton if you have not. It might sound dry and boring, you guys. I really get it, but it's of critical importance when we discuss these kinds of policy issues. I also just wanted to note that when something like this happens, major corporations stand to benefit, because if you don't fix the problem, if you don't actually fix the infrastructure in Jackson or in Flint or in Chicago, Indiana, or anywhere else, what ends up happening is charity groups come in and things like that. There are also public programs that fund this, but you end up like handing out water bottles, you guys. Well, who loves that? Nestle loves that. And Dasani and whoever else, they might even be the same company now that all these conglomerates are, whatever, you get the point. Companies that package water in plastic containers and then get to, take either public money or money from charity or money from GoFundMes or whatever to continue to provide water to these communities, they get to benefit from this. So there's all sorts of angles to this, but obviously, first and foremost, leaving a community without water, and in many cases forcing them to continue to pay for that water, is one of the most egregious things that I can imagine a city or state or county or country doing. So I hope that there's supposedly there's a federal investigation into local officials here and what has happened. I certainly hope there will be action taken to try to correct this, but I'm not naive enough to expect that that will happen in any timely manner. We all remember how the investigations in Flint and in Michigan went, and how they are still to this day dealing with water problems. How many years into us knowing about this crisis? So, this is something that we all need to take very seriously, and again, I want to underscore the importance of federal funding and understanding why these programs should be paid for at the federal level. I also want to give a huge shout out to Jordan Sheraton and Status Quo, who have been among the very few who have stayed right on top of these stories. Jordan, it might not have been Jordan. Status Quo was on the ground in Jackson, and Jordan and others from Status Quo have been constantly on the ground in Flint, Michigan. I really want to give them a shout out because they've been, like I said, among the very few who've actually, cared to cover this with any consistency whatsoever. You can also find our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine, on Status Quo regularly doing the Let's Get Ready to Grumble segments. I encourage you guys to hop over to their YouTube when this stream is over and take a look at some of those segments, as well as Jordan and his colleagues reporting in Jackson and Flint and elsewhere. So we have a devastating murder to talk about, once again by police. This is in Yahoo, and I picked this article very specifically. It's written by Judson Jeffries, and I think he does an absolutely fantastic job of framing this issue. Most of the pieces I saw about Donovan were framed from the typically pro-police or neutral perspectives, and I think Judson does a really great job of framing this the correct way. So this, again, is in Yahoo. Killing of Donovan Lewis. We all pay when police snuff out unarmed people. Judson Jeffries is a professor of African American and African Studies at the Ohio State University. He's going to focus in this piece, you guys, on how society as a whole pays the price when we allow police to do this. I just want to say, first and foremost, obviously, the primary victims of police violence are those who are directly victimized by police and their loved ones. This is just another angle to it about how those, how us allowing police to continue to behave so just obnoxiously, I said that absolutely horribly. Us allowing police to continue to be as brutal as they are in their conduct, the little easier there, is also harmful to the rest of us and to society as a whole. Sadly and tragically, young Donovan Lewis is the city's latest unarmed victim of an avoidable and senseless police shooting, but likely won't be the last. How many lives will get snuffed out before the American people say, okay, enough is enough? Isn't it obvious by now that when an unarmed person who poses no threat is killed at the hands of police, we all lose, including the police? Over the past few years, I cut myself off there. Over the past few years, the American people's confidence in the police seems to have plummeted. Historically, black and brown people's feelings about the police have, in the main, ranged from resentful to disdain. What is relatively new, however, is the seemingly sizable number of whites, that is, if the number of white protesters we see on the nightly news is any indication, that harbor an unprecedented level of dislike for the police. How in the world can police work be carried out effectively in communities where large sectors of residents are mistrustful of the police? People who distrust the police aren't likely to call on the police in time of need or cooperate with the police when asked to do so. We all lose under these circumstances. When will the American people wake up and realize that we have for years been footing the bill for police misconduct? Those huge settlements that the survivors of the victims' families receive, as well as the monies from those successful civil lawsuits, are our tax dollars at work. I was just talking about MMT. We talk a lot about how the tax dollars rhetoric is nefarious. He is talking about at the local level here. So when police murder someone in your city, and then your city pays out a settlement to the victims' families and loved ones, that is coming out of the city budget, which is much more directly related to your taxes than the federal government's budget is. Just want to give that caveat. And get this, police killings are so widespread that many mid-major and small cities with police departments have taken to purchasing insurance policies that pay money to people who have been subjected to police abuse. Again, your city's budget is also paying for that insurance policy. By contrast, major cities self-insure, which means they allocate a certain amount of money to be used for that purpose. Paul Butler, author of the 2017 book Chokehold Policing Black Men, points out that such a development raises an issue academics refer to as moral hazard, as police officials may be less likely to encourage their officers to exercise restraint when dealing with motorists and pedestrians, for paying for brutality and shooting deaths is already accounted for in the budget. Over the years, unjustified police killings of citizens have, understandably so, sparked massive uprisings and/or demonstrations that have, in some cases, adversely affected a city's economic development. We all lose when this happens. Just ask the residents of Los Angeles and the policy experts there if that city's infrastructure has fully recovered from the rebellion that unfolded 30 years ago. I would hope that police departments endeavor to employ the very best and brightest its city has to offer. But how does an agency expect to recruit the area's best young people when its department is constantly in the news for all the wrong reasons? What smart and up-and-coming young person who envisions law enforcement as a potential vehicle to positively impacting people's lives wants to join a department around which controversy constantly swirls? More specifically, what intelligent person of color would want to join an agency with that kind of soiled public image? When the pool of applicants consists of those for whom the police department is their only career option, we all lose. When the 20-year-old Donovan Lewis was killed, the loss was and is greater in some quarters than in others, but make no mistake, we all lost. I thought that was fantastic framing from Judson Jeffries there, which is why I chose that piece to bring to you all. But this, again, is a tragic shooting. For those that did not see the video, this was a no-knock raid. They burst into his apartment and shot him in his own bed. He fell asleep holding his vape, reportedly, and police thought it was a gun because they think literally everything is a gun. That's what they're trained to do. And they shot and killed him in his own bed. He was 20 years old. We talked last week about Breonna Taylor and how an officer has pleaded guilty to essentially falsifying documents that were used to request the search warrant for that no-knock raid. I am hopeful that these cases will not only shine a light on police brutality and our need to defund and abolish police and build an institution that actually acts in the interest of public safety, but I also hope that these instances will give us an opportunity to reflect on no-knock warrants more broadly and in general, and the process by which those warrants and other warrants are obtained, because I think there's a whole lot of falsifying documents going on among police when it comes to trying to get warrants from judges. There's also the problem, of course, that there are significantly more judges that come from a prosecutor background than from a defense or public defense background, and that means that they are significantly more inclined to side with and trust the police to do the right thing. There are all sorts of problems at every step of these processes, you guys, from requesting a warrant to getting a warrant to executing a warrant to dealing with a subject when you're at the location. At every single step, there are massive problems in the incentive structure and in how the institution behaves. This is why we just need to abolish police and start from scratch. You cannot fix I say this literally every time we talk about police, you cannot fix an institution that was born out of slave catchers. You can't do it. If an institution starts off as slave catchers and evolves from there, there will always be things that are deeply wrong with it. There will always be deeply racist elements to that institution, and deeply violent aspects to that institution. So this is another tragedy. My thoughts go out to Donovan's family, and I hope that these officers are held to account, as well as the judge that approved that search warrant. And I hope that this will cause further scrutiny in terms of those processes in general and police as an institution. All right. So on a much brighter note, it appears that we may actually have a strike among rail workers. And this would be obviously more impactful, I think, than other strikes and labor organizing, just because of the role that rail plays in our economy. So I want to start here with a piece in More Perfect Union, at More Perfect US on Twitter. Perfectunion.us is their website. Really encourage you guys to check them out. They cover labor issues and they highlight, union busting and these kinds of things. I really encourage you to follow their work. They're all over this recent labor movement, and they do fantastic reporting. Rail strike by the numbers. Railroad profits are soaring at workers' expense. We poured through the railroad's financial filings. Profit margins and stock buybacks have shot up while spending on workers dropped drastically. That is Warren Buffett. He, of course, is BNSF. I happen to live in Bellingham, you guys. If you ever hear a train honking on my live stream, it's because I'm about 2 blocks from the rails going through Bellingham. That is largely BNSF, and they are often carrying fossil fuels. So all bad news if you ever hear a train going by on my live stream. This piece is by Eric Gardner. America's largest railroads have transformed a once staid industry into a profit-generating machine on par with the world's richest technology companies, even as they drove down conditions for the tens of thousands of workers they employ. A more perfect union analysis of financial filings of major U.S. railroads found that their windfall profits have come at the direct expense of their workforce. In the past 2 decades, operating profit margins nearly tripled for the major carriers, while the percentage of revenue they spent on labor sunk by double digits. Tens of thousands of American rail workers have gone 3 years without a raise amid a contract dispute with the major carriers. The industry has rejected their calls for sick leave, guaranteed time off, and a range of other improvements, even as their profit margins swelled. In 2001, leading American freight carriers CSX, KC Southern, Norfolk Southern, and Union Pacific earned average operating margins of about 15%. That means that after accounting for all the costs associated with running a railroad, including money spent on compensation and benefits, for every $100 of revenue, investors were left with $15 of profit. 20 years later, that number has skyrocketed to over 41%, or $41 per $100 of revenue. During that same time period, the percentage of revenue spent on labor saw a sudden and drastic decline. In 2001, the 4 railroads spent about $8.7 billion on compensation and benefits to generate $25.6 billion. In 2021, the company spent 10% more on labor but brought in nearly double the amount of revenue. It's, quote, insane to think about, said Matt Rustel, I apologize if I'm butchering that name, a popular investing commentator and former transportation analyst earlier this year. Technology and more efficient diesel engines have made the rail industry more efficient, but the reduction in headcount has an outsized impact on operating profit margins. According to the Presidential Emergency Board, which analyzed the dispute, quote, the carriers maintain that capital investment and risk are the reasons for their profits, not any contributions by labor. As the graph below demonstrates, there's a clear inverse relationship between a company's profit margin relative to the amount it spends on labor. And you can see the graph there showing that compensation and benefits as a percentage of revenue are going down while operating income margin continues to go up. And that looks like it might be a graph from 2000 forward. So great reporting there from More Perfect Union. I once again really encourage you guys to go follow them at More Perfect US on Twitter, and perfectunion.us is their website. Fantastic reporting on labor issues. I got one more piece here that I want to show you about how the federal government is trying to stop this. This is in Jacobin. It's by Joe Burns. The federal government is trying to stop railroad workers from striking. Railroad workers bargaining for better pay and working conditions are at an impasse with their employers, causing the federal government to intervene to ward off a disruptive strike. But rail workers should be allowed to strike if and when they want to. For months, 140,000 union railroad workers have been stuck at an impasse with their employers, who are united under the banner of the Association of American Railroads. The terms of the dispute should be familiar to most workers: attendance policy, staffing, and wage increases. Despite record profits, rail employers have cut staffing, placed enormous burdens on workers that aren't reflected in their pay. By all accounts, rail workers are in a militant mood. An attendance policy prompted rail unions to attempt a strike earlier this year. In July, 99% of union members who cast ballots voted to authorize another strike. You guys, 99%? 99%. Prompting Joe Biden to intervene in August. In order to avert a strike, Biden appointed a presidential emergency board to reach a compromise and settle the dispute. The PEB put some money into wages, but predictably did little on the workers' core workplace concerns. The rail unions are unenthusiastic about the PEB ruling, and the largest groups have not been willing to put the recommendations out for membership ratification. While bargaining continues, the unions will be eligible to strike on September 16th, which is 30 days following the PEB recommendation. The eligibility requirement is a term of the the Railway Labor Act passed in 1926, which regulates bargaining in the rail and airline industries. Even though the RLA protects the right to strike in words, politicians in both parties have used the legislation to strip railroad workers of that right in practice, often ramming settlements down the throats of striking workers. Over the years, Congress has intervened several times to delay strikes and sometimes even impose terms on railroad workers. President Harry Truman threatened to have the Army run the railroads in 1950 during the Korean War. In the 60s, President Johnson imposed a longer no-strike period on rail workers. President Barack Obama delayed a threatened strike in 2011. Just hours into the last nationwide major rail strike in 1991, Congress passed legislation imposing the very contract workers rejected. The legislation required further bargaining, but held that if no agreement was reached, the terms of the PEB would be implemented, even though the unions had already rejected those terms. Republicans and nearly all Democrats lined up to take away rail workers' right to strike in 1991. The final vote was 400-5. This controversy created widespread disaffection with the Democratic Party, even spurring the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way employees to endorse Labor Party advocates, which was the last serious attempt to create a Labor Party in the United States. So a lot of the beef here, you guys, is less about wages and more about time off and sick time and things like that. A lot of rail workers have been forced to work absolutely inhumane hours. They have not been given time off. Things like being fired for going to a doctor's appointment. Really outrageous and egregious stuff here from the rail companies and the government, because the rail industry has the potential to bring the economy to a halt, has decided that they need to be treated differently than other workers in other industries who vote to strike or to unionize or to whatever. They have a union, but they're cast into their own category when it comes to what actions they can take to stand up for themselves and to demand better. I hope like hell this strike goes forward. I would encourage rail workers to strike to demand better, and I think that a strike from this kind of industry also has the potential to have some pretty massive ripple effects in other industries where other workers might decide that they're going to stand up for themselves, considering the climate to do so. So that is fantastic news, you guys. That is like some of the best news I have seen in a very long time, quite frankly, and I very much hope that it happens. As far as the latest, I have a tweet here. This is by Maximilian Alvarez, someone else you guys should go follow, at Maximilian_ALV. He is with Real News. I believe he's the founder of Real News, and he does a lot of labor reporting as well. He says, "This is huge. The rail carriers have been pushing the narrative that 10 out of 12 rail unions have accepted the Presidential Emergency Board's recommendations as the terms for a new contract. But the rank and file have the final say, and the signalmen have said, fuck that." He's retweeting Lauren K. Gurley, another great follow, you guys. She also covers labor quite extensively, at Lauren K. Gurley on Twitter. Update on railroad strike. The Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen rejected a tentative agreement with rail carriers. This means 3 of 12 national railroad unions could strike on at 12:01 on Friday, shutting down much of the country's transportation infrastructure. So again, here's to hoping that that happens. This is obviously an attempt here from the companies to frame things like, well, no, we're accepting the government's proposal, and the workers are too. But as Max points out, the rank and file have the final say, and it appears that they are not at all content with the conditions that have been put forth by the government. So we'll see what comes of this. We'll certainly cover this next week. I hope that on Friday there will be a strike among rail workers. And also on the labor movement, Starbucks has decided to provide slightly better compensation to non-union stores in an attempt to, a really naked attempt, to union bust and to prevent stores in the future from wanting to unionize. I want to share you guys my tweet here because this I just think is a really important sentiment. I retweeted Reuters Legal here saying Starbucks announced new student loan repayment tools and savings account programs for all U.S. employees who are not union members, the company said, amid a growing union drive and soaring demand for coffee. I retweeted this and said, Starbucks slightly improving conditions for non-union workers in an attempt to union bust is ironically an example of how unions force better conditions for everybody. Support your local organizers. So, guys, because of the threat of a union, they are improving. They actually gave a raise as well to non-union workers. So this is an example of how unions sort of, the saying, rising tide raises all boats. This is how unions end up helping everybody in the area and in the industry. If you work, say, at a grocery store and you're not union, but there are other competitors in the area, grocery stores that are union, I guarantee you, 100% guarantee you that your compensation is better than it otherwise would be because of those unions. Because if they come in and undercut their competitors and say, well, we're going to pay $4 less and offer you no benefits, then who's going to work at that company? So unions do create a positive pressure in the right direction for workers that are in the same industry or in the same region, especially both. So, this is just, it's ironic that Starbucks is going down this path and sort of demonstrating, like, we could have done this all along, but we didn't until we thought there was a chance that the unions might actually succeed. And now we're scared, so we're gonna. So to the companies that say, we'll take care of you, don't let the union interfere, we'll be good to you, this should tell you all you need to know about that. They will not take care of you until they are forced to, and unions are the institution that will force them to. Unions are the institution that will give you a voice in your workplace. If you work in a non-union place, I strongly encourage you to talk to your colleagues about organizing, and I strongly encourage my audience to support local organizers in their area. Also want to quickly plug my interview with Victoria Conklin, who was illegally fired. She was a barista in Buffalo and was illegally fired for essentially sparking her store's decision to unionize. Her hearing, the NLRB filed a complaint based upon that firing. They found that it was illegal, and the hearing between the NLRB and Starbucks will be in December for her. If you haven't seen that interview, it's also on Real Progress in Action. Make sure to go check that out. Stand with your local organizers. You guys do not cross picket lines, and if you can support workers via mutual aid or by showing up to a protest or however that might look, go into the store and voice your support. Any and all of the above is a fantastic way to go. Please do support your local organizers in whatever capacity you can. So Ken Starr died, you guys. Anyone remember Ken Starr? Obviously was appointed special prosecutor in the Clinton situation and was known for a few other things as well. I want to show you guys a tweet here that I think kind of sums it up quite nicely. This is by Chomnomsky at Sam Thielman on Twitter. He says, Ken Starr is dead. I'll never forget how he had a woman wear a wire so he could humiliate her friend on national television for giving a blowjob, then got fired from his job as university president when it turned out he'd covered up the football team's years-long rape spree. R.I.P. Oh, God, that's wonderful. Ken Starr was an absolute sack of shit. And just like the Queen, I'm not going to mince words simply because he just died. Covering up systemic rape is worthy of eternal condemnation, universal eternal condemnation, not praise or respect or anything of the sort. So that's not really a story. I couldn't help but show you guys that tweet because I think it's completely spot on. In one more sort of funny, lighthearted little quote-unquote story here. This is a tweet about Cards Against Humanity. They often take sort of political action. When Trump was going to build his border wall, they decided to buy some property right on the border, and they were going to, basically fight him to the end in terms of using that land for the border wall. They do a whole number of wonderful political things. It's the card game. For those that aren't familiar, it's like apples to apples for adults. It's quite fun if you've never played. But this is what they are currently doing in response to the Dobbs decision. So this is by Colleen at Little Witty on Twitter. Cards Against Humanity is donating 100% of their profits to the National Network of Abortion Funds if the order comes from a state restricting abortion access. If someone selects, I didn't agree to this, an additional $5 is added to their cart. So I want to show you guys what she means here. She leaves a couple of screenshots for us. So you can see at the top left there, it's $29 US. They say, fuck, you live in Texas, a theocratic hellscape where human beings are forced to carry unwanted pregnancies by threat of imprisonment. We're donating 100% of our profits from your order to the National Network of Abortion Funds. You have three options here. You can say, okay. You can say, give 5 more, we'll match it. Or you can say, what? I'm pro-life. I didn't agree to this. If you click the last option, here's what comes up. So you don't want us using your money to pay for abortions? You know, sometimes people have values imposed upon them by bigger, more powerful entities, and they are forced to do things that they don't want to do, like carrying an unwanted pregnancy. For example, we just added an extra $5 donation to the National Network of Abortion Funds to your cart. You can see upper left there, it's now $34 US. I just think that is fantastic and wonderful. And, you know, I grow very tired of corporations staying neutral on these sort of inflammatory issues in the attempt to make sure they're not cutting into their customer base. One of the more repulsive quotes that I've ever heard was from Michael Jordan, who very famously, when he was asked why he didn't get involved in social and political fights or why he didn't stand up for the black community more when they were being brutalized by police during his career, he very famously said, Republicans buy sneakers too. In other words, I would like to be able to sell shoes to people of all political views, and all I really care about is that. Michael Jordan's a billionaire. He does not need that shoe sale to Republicans. So most companies and businessmen and business people, I should say, have that attitude that, you know, I'm not going to piss off any portion of the political spectrum because I want to make sure they're going to continue to buy my product. Cards Against Humanity is basically saying, no, fuck you. You're paying $5 more to the thing you can't stand. I just think that's fantastic. I think it's admirable and obviously quite hilarious. And, you know, it brings me some joy to consider the look on people's face as they click, I don't want my money going to that. And they see, oh, okay, well, we've added $5 more to the National Network of Abortion Funds. Wonderful stuff from Cards Against Humanity. Alrighty, guys, so with that, I will call it a show. I really appreciate you all tuning in on a Tuesday evening so late. I apologize that I was not able to go live on Sunday. Again, I had some tech issues, and it was kind of a whole mess. But I appreciate you guys bearing with me and showing up here today. Once again, want to encourage everybody to go to realprogressives.org to learn more about our organization or find all of our fantastic content, from my podcast to Steve's shows to our fantastic articles. You can find it all at realprogressives.org. If you were unfamiliar with the MMT things I was talking a little bit about today, go to realprogressives.org for MMT educational content as well. And I also want to once again plug the upcoming RP Live, which is with Michael Hudson. Give me just a second here, guys. Here we go. Go to realprogressives.org to find the registration link for that. It'll be on the 19th at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern. You won't want to miss it. He'll do a presentation, and then you'll be able to ask questions if you so choose. Make sure to go register at realprogressives.org for RP Live with Michael Hudson. And one more plug here, you guys. I'm sure some of you are familiar with M for All, who we have worked with on a number of occasions. They put these marches on in D.C. They've done a panel about healthcare and other events and protests and things of that nature. They are filing with the United Nations to essentially complain about the United States not having a healthcare program of any sort at all, really. So they say here, healthcare is a human right. March for Medicare for All is joined by, and they list a whole bunch of groups there. I'll let you guys read them if you want to go to their website, m4mforall.org. In filing a formal human rights complaint with the United Nations Human Rights Council against the United States government for gross violations of the right to health care in this country. So what they need, again, go to m4mforall.org if you'd like to participate in this. They need some healthcare testimonials. So if you have a healthcare story that you would like to share as part of that UN complaint, please go to m4mforall.org and share your story so that it can be included in the formal complaint with the United Nations for the United States' lack of reasonable healthcare. Alrighty, you guys, I so appreciate your support. Really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope to see you all this coming week. I also very quickly, I forgot to say this earlier, but I've been doing interviews. We're going to start doing, on my Sundays, I'm going to kind of focus on covering the news, and we're going to share interviews with you guys throughout the week. If you have missed what I've done so far, Andrew Perez came on to talk about his piece on the largest political donation in history and how dark money donations can operate. Ross Barkin, who's with New York Magazine, came on and talked about the primaries and special election in New York. And Victoria Conklin, who is the fired Starbucks barista I mentioned from Buffalo, came on and talked about her experience with Starbucks and how the NLRB has filed a complaint over her firing. And we're also going to bring to you this week an interview that I did with friend of the show, Vinay Orakondi, who's an attorney and activist who's been very focused on ranked choice voting lately. He came on to talk about the importance of ranked choice voting. He's from Australia, so he did some comparing between the two countries. Australia does have ranked choice voting, and there are a number of cities and states throughout the country that have in recent years and are currently considering going to ranked choice systems. So it is kind of heating up, this fight for ranked choice. I think it would be a fantastic improvement on our political process, and I encourage you all to keep an eye out for that interview with Vinay on ranked choice voting and other interviews that I have coming up as well. Once again, you guys, I really do so appreciate your support. It means the world that that people tune in to hear what I have to say about these things. Really, really do appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next Sunday. Have a fantastic week.